This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Do you think of yourself as a farmer or a casual gardener? At one of our coffee breaks in Middletown, we met a woman who says she practices modern homesteading. Of course, we were intrigued, and so we got working on today's show. What does it mean to be a modern homesteader? Are you interested in learning how to grow your own food or raise some livestock so you aren't as dependent on the local grocery store? Join the conversation. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Now, joining me now is Farah Masani, who's a farmer, forager, and modern homesteader based in Wilton, Connecticut. Farah, welcome to our show.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm super excited to share.
So we were talking about what it means to be a homesteader, and this is a lifestyle that you have chosen and been living for several years. So when you think about what led you to the practicing this, what were some of the factors?
I was super frustrated with the quality of food that was available for purchase in the markets and the grocery store. And I decided, what the heck? Let me just grow my own food. I love being outside. I enjoy the fact that you put a seed in the ground and then you have food to eat. And so I decided, I'm just going to do it. It's a way of life. Let's enjoy it. It surrounds me with like-minded people in a healthy lifestyle where I get to be outside and work my muscles. And I get to teach and share and educate people on how they can do it themselves.
How did you learn?
I learned by watching. So I grew up in Bombay, and I spent the weekends in the countryside with families that homesteaded. They had chickens and goats and had rice fields and grew wheat and fruits and vegetables. And I found myself being super happy and excited to be around that way of life and that lifestyle. And so I started watching and learning, and my nanny and my parents hated the fact that I went out and got dirty in the fields, because that's not what girls from our families do. And I learned by watching, and it came very quickly to me, and I educated myself. I learned from other farmers and just started doing it. And that's the one thing that I like to tell people all the time: just do it.
When we think of the term homesteader, so essentially you're a farmer, but it's more than that. So you're learning to be self-sufficient, and it's not about technically maybe selling what you're producing, but sharing with the community?
It is. So I do grow for myself. I grow for my winter stores. I preserve. I barter. Because for example, I don't have a cow. I don't have milk. So I will take my produce and my fruits and I will share and barter and get what I can't get or grow on my own land. I also have a farm stand where I let my produce and honey and eggs out where people can come and take and put in a tin box some money if they want to, or put something else that they've made at home, that we can have this amazing system of give and take. The goal was to be able to barter or grow everything except for toilet paper. So that's what me and my housemates, my fellow farmers, decided to do. Let's see if we can live by growing and bartering every single thing except for toilet paper. And we tried so hard. We made our soap. We tried so hard. We hunted Connecticut far and near for people who were willing to give us what we didn't have.
So how did that go? You said you tried so hard. Were you able to do it?
No. No. I wasn't able to find grains. Like, if you think about it, not a lot of growers grow grains. And where am I going to go get that? It's hard. But if you look and you keep looking, you'll, eventually find it. And so we had a lot of fun doing it. It's a great community. We really enjoyed life. We cooked together. We ate together. People from our town, our lovely town of Wilton, would wander by and they would wonder what we're doing. They're like, what are you doing? And how can we participate? They would send their kids to hang out with us and learn. That was fun.
I understand that you consider yourself a landless farmer. What does that mean?
I have no land. At this moment, I've lost my land. So I'm using other people's land. I'm working with Jonathan, the farmer at Ambler Farm, which is Wilton's town farm, and helping him grow food for the community, for the farmer's market, for the farm stand. and I love it. I also use people who have excess land, who don't want it to be a manicured lawn. And if they want it to be an edible garden, they'll reach out to me and they'll say, hey, Farah, can you turn this into a growing field? And I'll say, absolutely, let's do it. And I'll turn it into a garden that's really beautiful and grow food for them and for myself and for the community to share.
You spoke positively about your town of Wilton, where you've lived for several years now. You're in a part of Connecticut that is wealthy. You mentioned people like to have the well-manicured lawn, but maybe necessarily don't have the time or interest in actually using the land to grow food. And so I'm curious if you could talk about that in terms of was it difficult to find people at first who said, that they'll let you onto their property because people really like to have, the private property, many acres, to grow food. What do they think of that, that partnership?
So it's a mix. There's some people who absolutely need to have their manicured lawns. And then there's some people that are willing to explore, that are willing to give up some of their beautiful lawn to grow. And I think through education, through conversation, through talking about what the possibilities are, people are super curious and open, and they're wanting to do it. With the work Connecticut has done with the pollinator pathways and growing flowers and growing edibles, people are now learning and getting educated, and they really want it. So over the years, I'm surprised that the number of people reaching out to me have increased significantly to give up their land to turn into food.
You're hearing Farah Masani. She's a farmer, forager, and homesteader based in Wilton, Connecticut. Fairfield County, obviously a place with very expensive land. If you didn't find these people willing to let you come on to their property, you wouldn't be able to farm down in Wilton.
Yeah. For many years, I rented a very old house right in Wilton Town Center. And it came with land and acreage, and we just took this residential property and converted it into growing land. We had chickens, we had ducks, we had turkeys. This property was owned by a real estate person who really didn't care about farming, but allowed us to do this. Unfortunately, we had to give up that property. It was over 100 years old, and it was mold infested. So I had to give up this land and became a landless farmer. And then I ended up starting a farm for Barcelona Wine Bar, the restaurants in Connecticut, as a teaching place, as a training place to get chefs come close to their food, to learn how to grow food and to use their food in their menus.
Kate on Twitter writes, I grow fruits and vegetables, raise chickens for eggs, and also have inoculated logs to grow mushrooms. It's partly because our food system is broken, she says, and also out of wanting to be more in tune with our planet. Plus, I think lawns for ornament's sake are dumb. Is that sentiment growing? That, what's the point of having this manicured green lawn when you could be growing things and producing things to eat?
Absolutely. That resonates with me very well, and more people are beginning to think like that. And don't get me started on the chemicals that go into our lawns. That's a whole nother show. But it's a reality that it's ruining our environment.
Jesse's calling from Old Lyme. Jesse, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I'm a fisherman. Well, I'm also a commercial fisherman in Alaska for wild-caught salmon. But here in Connecticut, we have such an opportunity to eat sustainably through our water systems. Now, granted, the stripers and the bluefish, as pregnant women and children, you have to kind of watch that. But there's so many species where you don't. The fluke, sea bass, tautog, blackfish, which was hugely popular in the 17 and 1800s, and these and many more species, porgy, and then even in the freshwater system, we have a stock trout, going on where you can buy your license and go enjoy fishing with your kids. And so not only is it eating sustainably, helping a Connecticut Fish and Wildlife or in the ocean, but it's a great way to fight mega farming and to get your protein yourself, and you can feel good about doing that as well.
Well, thank you, Jesse, for your call. Farah is also a buyer again for the Barcelona restaurant group, or had been for some time. When we think about restaurants really bringing that farm-to-table experience, are they also thinking about the fish that we have in New England and bringing that to the table versus ones that are overfished and are problematic?
Absolutely. One of the things that we worked very hard to do at Barcelona was to bring not only farm fresh produce, but also fresh fish from the waters that surround us. In the South, when we have fishermen that go out and trawl and bring that produce, that seafood, back to our restaurants, it is absolutely delightful for our chef to be able to showcase that. In Georgia, we had Georgia shrimp. In the Northeast, in Boston, we had dayboat fish. It is exciting, and it is fun to be able to share and promote that so our chefs can learn and then ultimately share that with our guests that come to the restaurants.
Today here on Where We Live, we're talking about modern homesteading. Again, this movement to become more self-sufficient, to use land for growing fruits and vegetables, plants that benefit our pollinators. Jamie is calling from Wallingford. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question to your guest. I have a very small patch actually in my backyard, and I have tried to produce things actually over there, but there are some trees, and some trees which does not allow full-time sun. So there is sun over there, but not all the time, and I'm not willing to cut off those trees. Can your guest help us? And it's a small patch. I'm not saying it's a big acres and acres. It's less than half an acre.
So you're looking to grow vegetables or other plants,
Correct.
But you're in a very shaded area?
Not very shaded. I would say there are some trees that block sunlight for about 3-4 hours in a day.
I would highly recommend growing leafy greens, kales, collards, chard, lettuce, arugula. They love cool, shaded weather. Try to stay away from tomatoes, eggplants, cucumbers that need a lot of sun. You'll be amazed at the harvest and the bounty you can get from leafy greens, not to mention the nutrition. Spinach is another great one. If you want to get exotic and try something fun, my favorite is amaranth. Try eating amaranth leaves. They're very nutritious, they're colorful, they're pretty, and they love cool, shaded weather.
Those are some good tips from Farah Masani, again, a farmer, forager, and homesteader based in Wilton, Connecticut. You're listening to Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Coming up, we're going to talk to another Connecticut resident who has tried urban homesteading, and we're going to continue to take your questions, too. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. We're learning about a practice that's getting more attention in recent years, modern homesteading, when people choose to become more involved in growing and raising their own food. In studio with me is Farah Masani, a farmer, forager, and homesteader based in Wilton, Connecticut. And joining me now in studio is Sven Peel, owner of Connecticut Edible Ecosystems. It's a sustainable landscape design company. Sven, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you very much.
So I understand you were technically a homesteader in Connecticut. Was it a few years ago? What led you to this practice?
The economic crash of 2008.
So when that happened, did you lose employment and you were trying to find ways to grow your own food so that you were able to live?
Yes. In short, I was laid off, and this was at the beginning of the crash, so there were just more and more people being laid off and less jobs available. And I took after some thought, took the opportunity, or took advantage of the opportunity to learn how to take better care of myself.
So where did you begin? We heard Farah say earlier she learned by watching. What about you?
I grew up with a garden in Guilford. As a child, I had a community garden plot in New Haven, a little 4x8 raised bed for one season. And then the crash occurred, and I made a lot of mistakes from there.
Like what?
Oh, planting, like the gentleman that called with the shady yard. I planned my garden in an area that was full shade, and everything got all leggy and didn't want to do what it was I would hope it would do, and eventually moved that garden. And a lot of it had to do with planning. The mistakes I made were because I didn't do my research and I didn't plan well, I assumed.
So what are some resources for Connecticut residents if they don't really know where to begin? There are organizations that are there to help that helped you.
Yes, I had gone to Connecticut NOFA workshops.
And what does that stand for again?
The Northeast Organic Farming Association. I had gone to their workshops. I had gone to the library and got books on gardening, and basically tried it myself. I mean, I put seeds in the ground on day one, basically, and then through these entities and through the library and so on, was able to learn what to do.
Some people listening now may not have a lot of space, especially if you live in one of Connecticut's cities. You did urban homesteading in New Britain, I believe. So What did that look like? How much space did you have? And how did you choose what to grow?
Well, in season one, it was probably like a 16 by 4 foot bed. Season two, I expanded to a neighbor's property across the street where they had gardened. Season three, I expanded to another neighbor's property where they had a garden, and eventually it was covered 650 square feet.
And were you able to use everything that you grew? Because I know that's something personally when I love seeing plants grow and getting a good bounty in August and September. But then the question of you don't want to waste it. And so how did you avoid that?
I learned how to can and preserve.
And that's interesting because that's a skill depending on where you grew up and what generation you're from. Canning may be something that you learn from your family. The woman that pitched this show to us actually said, she had family in Indiana, and that's where she learned how to can. And it's become, I guess, more trendy now to learn how to preserve. And so what are some tips for people who thinking about, well, how do I do it?
I would say, especially on the canning side, outside of the freezing side, don't make it up. Follow the Ball Blue Book. There's reasons why you're supposed to have as much acidity in the product as, and that is so you don't die from botulism.
Yeah, that would be a good thing. You mentioned earlier that you were led to homesteading for practical reasons, but when we hear the term homesteading, it can call up an image of a libertarian or a gun-toting vision of someone who wants to be self-sufficient. I don't want to rely on the government. I don't trust the government. So how did you reconcile? When people hear homesteading, is it confusion about what it means exactly in today's generation?
Well, I would, first off, to answer that, I would like to honor the original homesteaders of this country, the Native Americans. And from there, I would say that a byproduct of my process was to build community. That was mentioned earlier. And so I had next door neighbor, a little very young girl who was in my garden all the time who wants to eat healthy food. She doesn't eat fast food today. I gave food to neighbors in need. And I think it's really a community building situation. I have run into plenty of people who think that I was sitting on my front porch in a rocking chair and smoking a corncob pipe and holding a sawed-off shotgun. But that's the furthest from my thought process.
You mentioned the Native Americans. Even the term homesteading comes from a policy, a U.S. government policy to take land away from Native Americans so that they could go to white settlers. And so we should remember the context of that term. I wanted to take some calls now. My guest, Sven Peel, owner of Connecticut Edible Ecosystems, a sustainable landscape design company, and Farah Masani's here, farmer, forager, and homesteader based in Wilton, Connecticut. Charlie in Bridgeport. Charlie, go ahead.
Hi, Farah, I have a question. I want to build some vegetable boxes, and it's on an area that's typically infested with a lot of weeds. And what is your recommendation? We're near a pond, and we want to do something that's safe, but is it laying down a tarp underneath? And, if you can give me help on that would be terrific.
I love to use newspaper or cardboard boxes, things that you can get in, quite honestly, your recycle dump. Don't go out and buy anything. Lay some newspaper, lay some cardboard down, put your soil and your compost right on top of that. If you've already built your box, do it that way. If you haven't, then build your box around that newspaper and cardboard. I like using rough-cut lumber as opposed to processed lumber. There's lumber yards across Connecticut that you can go to get that.
I was thinking, I'm taking a walk in Hartford near where our studios are, and somebody had freshly put down mulch, and it's that mulch that is dyed that you see at the big box stores, and that's not necessary, is it? I mean, it's more of an aesthetic thing, Farah?
It is. It absolutely is. It is not necessary. You can use leaves. We have plenty of trees that fall leaves in the fall time, and you could use that to cover your areas.
Sven, anything you want to add to Charlie's question about dealing with weeds?
I would say your weeds are indicators of your soil conditions. We tend to see dandelions in soils that are low in calcium, I believe. If we look at a lot of our fallow farm fields, we'll see mugwort, which is allelopathic and can cause some problems. But I would say you can also use your weeds per se. Some of them can be eaten. To understand more about the aspects of your site.
You mentioned dandelions. A lot of people don't like them because they think of them as weeds, but they are edible, and they're the first flowers, really, for our pollinators. And so it's good for the bees. Don't pull the dandelions.
Respect the dandelion, please.
And they're also really healthy. They're a what do you call that? A dynamic accumulator with their deep taproot, and they mine a lot of nutrients. And that's why one of the reasons why they're such a healthy plant is because of their properties.
Matt's calling from New Haven. Matt, what's your question?
Hey, how you doing this morning?
Doing well. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I'm a chef in New Haven. I was very, very intrigued by hearing about the work that was done with the Barcelona Wine Group, and just the general overall idea of landless farming, I think, is just an incredible idea. Having said that, though, I know from being in this industry that the Barcelona Wine Group is just that, a restaurant group. It's not really a mom-and-pop kind of place anymore. So for local restaurants in New Haven, all throughout Connecticut, how would this type of service be obtainable for someone like that, like a regular restaurateur or an executive chef for a small mom-and-pop restaurant that's just looking to get more information and really figure out different types of fruits, vegetables, and herbs that can be grown in Connecticut, and just really what's the easiest way for a regular restaurant to really get into this?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for calling in. I would recommend going to the farmers market. Make friends with your farmers. New Haven has an excellent farmers market. Go there, talk to your farmers, say, hey, what's up? What are you growing? What are you harvesting? What can I buy? How can I put this on the menu? You're the chef. Take the medium, get creative with it, and serve it to your guests. Support your farmer. Better yet, take your staff to a farm. Show them what's going on the farm. Teach them where food comes from. And that's the easiest way to get educated.
Sven, we also live in the social media YouTube age. So when people think, well, I need to learn, let me just call up a video. I'll put in the term homesteading. And then all kinds of stuff comes up. How do you know which sources to really trust in terms of how to do it the right way?
I would say that's a big, huge question, and you just opened a giant can of worms. There is a lot of, unfortunately, garbage on YouTube. Most of the time, I'll keep my opinion to myself. I would say your best bet in if you're going to go that route is to find the patterns in the videos of what works for people over the narrative. So if one person's talking about how they keep their chickens and they're using a specific method, I'll plug something, Certified Humane Animal Standards, and that's how they're designing their setup, and then you see another and you see another and they refer to this, then that's probably a decent way to go. But, somebody packing 20 chickens into 10 square feet or something of that nature, you're basically creating a mini CAFO in your backyard, which is a contained animal farming operation. You won't have happy animals. You'll have sick animals. They'll be pecking at each other and so on and so forth. So I would say the best way to go about it is if you're going to look on YouTube, find the patterns in the videos and see what is working and why it's working for that specific person in that specific site, and then see if that's relative to you.
Joan's calling from West Granby. Joan, go ahead.
Hi. Hi, Sven.
Hello.
I have a school in West Granby called the Institute of Sustainable Nutrition, and we teach a lot of these practices. It's centered around the science of nutrition, but then we teach sustainable foraging, sustainable regenerative gardening, culinary skills, and basically just living a lifestyle that is just, I guess, a little healthier, a little cleaner as far as chemicals. And we teach people to use the weeds and eat the weeds and that sort of thing. Kitchen medicine is a big piece where we teach people how to harvest the food and herbs to make what we call kitchen medicine. And so anyway, we're there.
Joan, I'm just curious, is this a school that's just for adults, or are you also teaching young people?
Well, it's basically right now for adults. We do have a staff person who is developing curriculum for children and families. We feel that if you're going to teach kids, you really need to involve the parents so that the kids are empowered to take that information and really use it.
Thank you. Thank you for letting us know about your school in West Granby. I did want to turn back to the guests with my question about, we hear so much about the obesity epidemic and the importance of getting children to eat healthy food. But part of that, mindset is teaching them where the food comes from, getting them involved in growing the food. I'm just curious, what are the initiatives out there to encourage young people in this way, Farah?
Just to give you an example, in the town of Wilton, each school, elementary, middle, and high school, has their own garden, their own greenhouse. They grow their own food and participate in cooking classes on site. Our middle school has a chef on site and a farmer. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is for parents to actually use the town farms that we have in Connecticut to get their children into summer camps. And educate themselves as well as their children to participate. And farming is a great way to be physically fit. And so what better way than to get your exercise and learn to grow food to combat obesity?
Mm-hmm. Sven, what can we do to encourage more young people? What are some of the initiatives that you're working on or you know about?
Well, when I was in New Britain homesteading, I had a little neighbor who was 1.5, 2 years old. And I gave her a tomato plant and a strawberry plant, and she learned how to water that. Little kids want to kind of do what their neighbors and parents and so on are doing. And by the time she was 4, I couldn't keep her out of my garden, even if I had wanted to try. And she basically grew up on fresh vegetables and fruits and so on. And when she moved at 5, wanted her own garden. And so she basically went into school as a within quotations, master gardener in comparison to children who did not have that experience. So I'm in full agreement with engaging your kids or engaging children at a very early age. But I'm also seeing, and I want to point this out, the young people today talking about climate change. And I know of young people who are looking at horticulture, landscape design, and food production. They're seeing these as one, not as separate siloed practices. And in my opinion, they get it. They understand. I mean, for some reason, they've all been separated, but they're all basically working with nature. Mm-hmm. And I think they're on the right track.
We hear often about food deserts in our cities and the importance of connecting all youth to quality food. Even if a neighborhood doesn't have a lot of green space, there are ways to encourage and to grow certain things. I mean, where can if someone's listening and they live in Hartford or New Haven and they're looking to try to grow something, what are some ways that they can do that? Some techniques.
I want to give serious pushback to this food desert idea because a city is, a city oftentimes there's a lot of concrete, but there's also a lot of land. And what we're not doing generally is putting food-producing systems into these community spaces and teaching from them. And that's something that I've been working on for the past couple of years now. And just like with the homesteading, looking outside the box, out of my own thought process to see what other municipalities, entities, nonprofits, individuals are doing to implement these food systems on public property, in the commons as they once were.
Katie's calling from Stamford. Katie, what's your question?
Oh, hi. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for putting this on the air. I live in Stamford. I have a very large garden, and it's been such a source of joy and family sharing. I grow a lot of vegetables that I end up sharing also with my neighbors. And my one question is, I have raised beds, and I have trouble getting my root vegetables to go down past where the raised beds are. It's North Stamford, so the soil is a little clay, a little rocky, and I put in sand, but I'm just curious if there's any other suggestions for growing. I'd like to grow more beets and longer carrots and all these wonderful different colored carrots that are coming on back into our world now.
Good question, Katie. Farah?
Are you direct seeding or are you transplanting?
Oh, I'm sorry, but she's on hold now, so just...
I'm sorry. I recommend starting seeds inside for root vegetables sometimes when people have a hard time having them grow down in their soil. Starting them inside sometimes gives the roots a jump start, and then when they're transplanted, helps them go deep down inside. So start that way. Swen, I'm sure you have another technique.
So oftentimes on farms or in small garden operations, one will own a tool called a broad fork, and that is to loosen up the soil. It looks like a giant kitchen fork with two handles. I would say if you don't want to drop $200, $250 on a tool like that, use your standard garden fork and loosen the soil. Don't turn the soil, but loosen the soil. And you'll basically want to do this every season. You allow better water penetration as well as aeration slightly, to the soil. And I think the root crops will have a better chance in loosened soil.
Our technical producer, Kion Wolf, mentioned straw bale gardening. Is that something that people can try to grow more root vegetables? And what is that exactly?
Straw bale gardening I think it's a fad. And the problem is straw is primarily carbon. Okay. And you'll see, and we're going to make some people uncomfortable at the moment. So, or not. So, I've seen at like festivals in Europe where they'll take never mind, I won't go there. So straw bales are primarily carbon, and it has no nutrients really. So you'll end up having to do a lot more to add nitrogen to that and then is it organic nitrogen? Is it synthetic nitrogen? The other minerals and so on that a plant needs. I do think it has a place and a purpose and so on. It just would take a bit more thinking about how the process works before one should just jump in and try it.
So lots of different techniques out there. Maureen calling from East Hampton. Go ahead, Maureen.
Oh, hi. I would just like to talk about the benefit of our insect-eating bats. I'm a biologist. I've been working with bats for more than 25 years. They're wonderful creatures, and they consume tons of night-flying insects, including those that destroy crops. They save billions of dollars for farmers every year. From you name it, there would not be a lot of vegetables on our table today without the efforts and the of insect-eating bats.
I agree with you. 100%. Bats are amazing, and if a family can get together and build a bat box and put it up in a tree, that's a great project to work with your kids on and bring bats to your neighborhood.
We're almost out of time, but just some final thoughts, Farah and Sven, for our listeners who are looking to grow more food, or even we like to think of like everyone wants to have chickens, or maybe I want to have a goat or a duck. What is really realistic for people? And what makes sense depending on where you live? I know there's different zoning requirements, Farah.
I think it's super important for you to look at what you eat, see what you like to eat, and maybe try to grow it. I'm happy to help anyone that wants to grow. I'm happy to come out there and help you do it, teach you to teach your kids. But look at what you eat, and that will be your indicator of what you should do.
And Sven?
I'm very much a planner, so I'm going to propose developing your goals, what it is that you want to do, and then in that you want to produce food for yourself. What is that food? Is it animal? Is it vegetable? Is it both? And especially on the animal side, realize that you're caring for something, that you are a steward of something. You will, slaughter it, eat it later on, but you want that to be as happy and healthy an animal. And you are responsible for its safety as well. I mean, if critters come in and are killing your chickens and so on, that's on you. It's not on the natural system that's out there. We were speaking of bats and so on. That's where I'm really pushing for the planning side. And real quick, there's a book called At Home with Holistic Management. That's a tool for managing your whole lifestyle, your whole site, your life, your family. And then another book, Gaia's Garden, A Guide to Home-Scale Permaculture. And so I would say in looking at holistic management for developing goals and how to meet them, including understanding your resources and so on, and Gaia's Garden, which is very much a comprehensive understanding of natural systems in relation to food production and your landscape and yourself, those would be two great guides to go with.
Well, thank you for those resources for our listeners. Again, Sven Peel, owner of Connecticut Edible Ecosystems, a sustainable landscape design company. Thanks for coming in, Sven.
Thank you very much. And
also Farah Masani, farmer, forager, homesteader based in Wilton, Connecticut. I'd love for you to come up to where we live, up in Suffield. You can tell me what I'm doing wrong, Farah.
You got it.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Coming up, we're going to think about how to extend this thinking to the gardens we may grow for aesthetic purposes. One way is by growing native plants. We're going to talk with the director of horticulture from the New England Wildflower Society. You can join us too. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Now, today we've been focusing on farming, but gardens aren't just for growing vegetables. Joining me now to talk more about this is Uli Lorimer, Director of Horticulture at the New England Wildflower Society. Uli, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So the emphasis the last part of the hour has been on growing local and thinking about food production. But when we think about sustenance, we can also think about aesthetics and how we plan our gardens, especially the flowers that we like to grow. What are the benefits of planting natives, Uli, and what are some suggested plants that people should be considering?
Well, sort of broadly, native plants really form the cornerstone of our Earth's ecosystems, and along with insects, form the base for the food chain that leads directly to our dinner tables. They define our landscapes and give our landscapes regional character, and they form all of the habitats on which all other living species depend. So by using and conserving native plants in the wild and using them in design spaces, we can work together to protect and enhance the resiliency and diversity of our planet.
And what are some options for people to consider? Because again, when the weather gets warmer, Uli, people head to the local nursery or maybe one of the big box stores, and they want to buy what looks attractive but may not be good for the local ecosystem.
Yeah, well, I think that you have to kind of think about all of the connections that these plants have. And then the reason I brought up insects, and I'm actually also happy that your previous caller brought up bats, just as a side tangent, that these ecosystems all co-evolve together. And so by selecting plants and regionally appropriate plants, and so this is things that you would find in the greater New England area. Those plants are going to come with already sort of a genetically predetermined relationships with insects, with butterflies, the things that like to eat insects, bats, for example, and they're also incredibly beautiful. So if you're looking for things like shrubs, for example, you can consider things that are fruit-bearing. So choke cherry is a really beautiful one, or winterberry. Certainly blueberries is a big favorite for everybody in the region, and they're fairly easy to grow on your own. You might have to compete with the birds to actually get the fruit, but those are a couple of good sort of shrub choices. For trees, I really like to promote the use of oaks and all the different oak species that we have here. Oaks have been proven to support over 400 species of moths and butterflies alone. And so if you had a choice to plant something that maybe only supported 10 different species or one that supported over 400, I think the choice is pretty obvious.
Tell us more about the work that the New England Wildflower Society is doing to preserve the biodiversity of plants in our region.
Yeah, so we are the first conservation organization in the country working with native plants and solely focused on New England's native plants. And our work encompasses saving plants in the wild, growing them in gardens and for restorations, and then also educating others on the value of their use. So we really sort of sit on a three-legged stool that is supported by education, horticulture, so the display and propagation of native plants, and conservation. And the conservation encompasses a pretty massive network of volunteers that go out and monitor rare plants in the wild. We have a seed bank where we try to preserve genetic diversity in seed form from populations that are threatened. And then those are then used to support restoration research, taxonomic research, and then sort of the greater scientific community. And then the horticulture side supports the conservation side in that we can work together to figure out how to propagate these plants, because some of them are difficult to grow. And then we can put them on display here at Garden in the Woods so that the public can come see and behold the really astounding diversity of plants that we have in the region.
When you mentioned the seed bank, so how exactly does that work? And when we think about some of the plants that we tend to want to grow or get seed packets for, some of them may be hybrids, so versus something that's an heirloom. Can you talk about the differences?
Sure. So what we're dealing with are primarily species of plants, so things that we find out in the wild, although hybridization does happen in some cases without human intervention. And sort of broadly speaking, seeds fall into two categories. One, the kind of seed that you can store for relatively long periods of time in cool, dry conditions. And then what are called recalcitrant species, are ones that you can't actually store in like a deep freezer. And so oaks, for example, fall into that category. You can't collect a bag of acorns and put it in the freezer and then expect to grow oaks in 5 or 10 years. So that kind of it poses a little bit of a challenge in that some plants need to be germinated and grown on a yearly basis, and other ones we can store for much longer periods relatively safely.
When we think about native plants, some of them can be pretty aggressive, and then there's also certain states are, trying to prevent invasives from coming in and choking out the natives. And so I'm just curious, when again people are thinking about planting their gardens, what makes sense using a native that maybe doesn't take over, and which should be ones that we should avoid, Uli?
Well, so the answer to that is a little bit more complicated and has to do with the process of succession. So I think many of your listeners can probably imagine an abandoned agricultural field in New England, and there's sort of a very well-studied progression of what happens when you stop intensely farming it, and that particular field then slowly over maybe 50 or 100 years turns back into forest. And usually the first species that come into this kind of situation are those particularly aggressive ones that if you plant this in maybe a smaller garden context, are quickly going to get out of control. And so, I think about goldenrods, for example. We have many, many species of goldenrods. Some of them are, the ones that you associate with those beautiful old abandoned fields in the fall, but those might not be the best choices for a smaller home garden because their role in the larger process is to colonize and take over. One of the ones that I find is much more well-behaved is called the anise-scented goldenrod, and the leaves actually, if you crush it, smell like licorice, which is another nice added bonus. And it behaves very nicely. Stays in place, doesn't run, doesn't go anywhere. So even within a group of plants like goldenrod, you have some that are really wonderful garden choices and other ones like Canada goldenrod, for example, that you might want to avoid unless you have lots of space for it to take over. Well,
the New England Wildflower Society is definitely doing important work. And is it a place where we can come visit from Connecticut? Tell us more.
We have a Trillium Week. I know trilliums are also very popular plants in gardens. We do have a number of different species for sale in our retail shop. But Garden in the Woods is also one of the national Trillium collection holders. And so we have a really wonderful collection showcasing the breadth of diversity and form for trilliums. And we have a whole week with different events sort of centered around appreciating and celebrating this very charismatic woodland species.
Well, it sounds lovely. I should mention you're in Framingham, Mass. We're going to put details out on our website, WNPR.org/wherewelive, for our listeners to learn more. Uli Lorimer, again, Director of Horticulture at the New England Wildflower Society. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on.
Today's show produced by Carmen Baskoff. Thanks to Seth Blair on the phones. Our technical producer is Kyone Wolf. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. As always, thanks for listening.